What you have told me so far, David, has been very interesting and I am sure will be of great benefit to all who read your story. So can we go back to your mission work while you are in the Philippines in December 2002?
Yes. What would you like to know?
I understand that you wrote to Mr. Jane, back in the UK, one of your principal trustees, at the Bierton Church, along with others, to inform them of the work you were doing, and you requested some help.
Yes, that's right. I not only wrote to Mr. Janes, but also Mr. Ramsbottom, the pastor of Bethel Strip Baptist Church in Luton, requesting the home address of Mr. Crane, our Bierton Church overseer.
Oh, why was that?
I wanted confirmation for the Philippine authorities regarding information about my membership of the Bierton Church and being sent to preach by the Bierton Church. I needed this for my application for a missionary visa. Look, I recorded Mr. James' letter here. I record Mr. James' reply to my letter in my daily diary of the mission, which was published in the Philippines in February 2003.
Did you get the confirmation that you wanted, and did you obtain a missionary visa?
Yes, I did. I was able to secure a missionary visa to live and work in the Philippines as a missionary, as being sent by the Bierton Church in 1982. However, when I wrote to Mr. Jane, in his reply, and we spoke on the telephone, he did not inform me of the closure of the Bierton Chapel.
So tell me about Mr. Janes and his function as a trustee.
Mr. Jane was one of 5 remaining trustees for the Bierton Church, all of whom were given a personal copy of my book, The Bierton Crisis, in 1984. They were responsible to look after the affairs of the Bierton Church.
What was the Bierton Crisis? Could you explain?
The Bierton Crisis was a detailed account of my reason for withdrawing from the communion of the Bierton Church in 1984. I have republished it now in my book, Let Christian Men Be Men. It was part of my responsibility as a church member to alert the trustees of the errors the church had fallen into and of their violation of their articles of religion.
So that was in 1984, and we are now talking about 2003 and you mission work in the Philippines. Tell me how this came about.
In 1982, I was called by the Lord and sent by the church to preach the gospel to wherever the Lord opened the door for me to preach. And it was in 2001 a door was opened in the Philippines for me to go and preach. I went on our first mission to the Philippines in 2001.
I understood that on your return from mission work, in June 2003 you spoke to Mr. Crane and he suggested you return to Bierton to open the chapel.
Yes. He informed me that the chapel had been closed for worship in December 2002 and that the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited had taken over the chapel. And he also suggested that I return to the Bierton Chapel to reopen it.
So what did you do?
Yes, that's right. One of the first things I did was to contact the association with the request to use the chapel, as I had 3 Filipino Baptist pastors of what they called old school, just like us at Bierton. These I had arranged to come to the UK to preach in some of the churches, and we wanted to make use of the chapel during their 3-month stay here in the UK.
So what was the response of the Association of Grace Baptist to your requests?
The association refused permission to use our chapel, and on my visit to the chapel and looking inside the building, I could see it was like a building site. All the interior walls were knocked down, the pews were removed, and it was a mess.
Oh, really? You can tell me about your visit to Mr. Jane and Mr. King.
Mr. Jane and Mr. King explained that they were too old to carry out their duties as trustees, and when they recovered the trust deed of the church that was lodged with Miss Gwen Ellis's solicitor, one of our church members, on her death, they found it difficult to read and understand it, so they asked the Association of Grace Baptist Churches to deal with their affairs as they were professional men.
Oh, is that so? And what did you think or feel about that? Did that seem right?
No, it was wrong. You see, I had a copy of the trust deed, and it is published in my book, The Bierton Crisis, and it states that only the church can elect new trustees, and that had not happened. I was a church member along with Irene Clark, as told in the book, The Bierton Crisis, and we had not been consulted about the election of new trustees. It was evident Mr. King and Mr. James were ignorant of their responsibilities, although Mr. King was told he could be appointed sole trustee of the Bierton Chapel if he was the only church member left, but he said he was too old to do that, as he was over 80 years old. So they decided to give the trust deed to the Association of Grace Baptist, who then proceeded to register the unregistered trust deed of the Bierton Church in their name in order to sell it.
So what did you think and do about that?
I realised I must take the matter up with the Association of Grace Baptist Churches, as the trust deed stipulated how trustees are to be elected, and of the responsibilities of church members, and it specifies the responsibilities entrusted to the trustees. Both Mr. King, Mr. James, and the other trustees had failed in their responsibilities entrusted to them, and the Association of Grace Baptist should have pointed this out to them. Mr. King and Mr. Jane knew Mrs. Clark and I were church members, and that the church had lapsed into serious error in allowing general redemption to be taught by Mr. King himself. This was against our articles of religion. That was why we withdrew from the communion. All the trustees were made aware of this, personally by me, as I had sent a copy of the Bierton Crisis to them in 1984. Mr. King and Mr. Jane should have notified me of the closure of the chapel when I wrote to him, so that I could have acted in an appropriate manner at the time in February 2003 on knowledge of the closure of the chapel.
So where did it leave you, and what did you conclude, and what did you do?
I then had reason to question the truthfulness and sincerity of the association, because they were duty-bound to look after the interests of the founding members of the church, and if lawful trustees fulfil their obligations and preserve the use of the chapel for the church for its intended purpose, they did not appear to be doing that.
Oh really? Can you explain that and why that was your conclusion?
Well, yes, I can. I was alive, and my ministry in the Philippines and in England was the direct result of me being sent by the Bierton Church in 1982 to preach the gospel. The commission was to preach wherever the Lord opened the door for me to go, and that was what I was doing. Mr. King, a church member in just the same way as I was, and he was a trustee, along with Mr. Jane and Mr. Bulmer and Mr. Martin. They were all aware of my position and of my withdrawal from the communion due to the church turning away from their articles of religion in allowing general redemption to be taught by Mr. King himself. It was a very serious error, that should have been stopped in 1984 after I had reported the matter to them, as that was their responsibility as trustees, but they didn't do so. They were all aware of my position and were bound to inform the association professionals about this matter, and the association were aware of it.
So what did you expect the association to do about the matter?
I wished to return to Bierton and reopen the chapel as suggested by Mr. Crane.
Was you able to speak to Mr. Jane about this on your return to the UK?
Yes, I visited him at his home in Eaton Bray and related the work we'd done and given him a copy of our book Trojan Warriors, so he was aware of our work. So he knew from our articles of religion as an incorporation and mission that these doctrinal articles of our mission were those of the Bierton Strict Particular Baptist Church.
Yes, I see. So you must have felt ignored and rejected and not considered.
Yes, rightly observed, because Mr. Jane knew of the intended visit of my Filipino strict Baptist pastors and our work in the Philippines, as he had written to me whilst in the Philippines to say neither he nor his minister, Mr. Rhymes, at the church at Eaton Bray were in a position to help. I felt some animosity from Mr. Jane and was reluctant to help resolve the matter in his letter. Mr. Jane never said a word about the closure of the chapel or of the death of Miss Gwen Ellis. He just said he had discussed my request for help with his pastor, Mr. Rhymes, and they were unable to help me.
Oh really? Did Mr. Jane say any more about the Bierton Chapel?
He informed me that he had changed his doctrinal position, and also that the church at Eaton Bray were no longer a gospel standard cause, and they had adopted the same doctrinal confession of faith as the Association of Grace Baptist Churches, or similar. You see, our Bierton Church was a gospel standard church. I also learned that Mr. Martin, one of our trustees, no longer supported our gospel standard position as a church. and there seemed some animosity of us being a gospel standard cause.
You say that your communications to the association began to be ignored, so how did you feel about that?
I felt that the association's conduct in this affair was far from satisfactory, and I would have expected at least to have been invited to their board of trustees to discuss the whole matter. I believed it was their duty, if they were faithful trustees, in order to ensure that the wishes of the founding members of the Bierton Church were carried out. They didn't do this. They did not seem at all interested in that at all. I think what had happened was this, that they had rushed ahead into making the decision to capitalise on the Bierton Chapel and make money for themselves. They had carried out internal work immediately on the closure of the chapel, and they applied for planning permission to convert the chapel into a 3-dwelling apartment. This was contrary to the terms set out in our trust deed, which states that a set period of time should elapse 1 year before any such work or plans was executed. They had gone ahead despite the fact that Mr. Jane had brought this to their attention, and they had spent money on demolition work and planning applications. Then I came along. This is just one example of Mr. Whitmarsh's ignorance of the law and his responsibility as the Secretary and Head of the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited.
Well, David, I can fully understand how you felt let down by the association, and you'll need to correct the matter.
That's right.
So tell me what you did.
I asked them to confirm that the copy of the indenture and title deed that I had in my possession were one and the same as they held and had recovered from Miss Gwen Ellis's solicitor.
Did they confirm your request?
They said the title deed was too fragile to photocopy, and they continued to ignore me.
Really, how did you?
I was very angry, so I sent them a copy of my book, The Bierton Crisis, which clearly confirmed all that I'd said, all of which the lawful trustees had a copy. There was no excuse for this ignorance.
So how did the association respond?
They denied that we were a gospel standard cause and stated that my membership had been terminated and that I had no lawful claim to the title deed of the chapel.
Really? So what did you do then?
I asked Mr. Ramsbottom, the editor of the Gospel Standard, to confirm in writing that we were a gospel standard cause. And I asked Mr. Crane to confirm that I was an honourable member of the church and that he had personally suggested that I return to reopen the Bierton Chapel.
But it sounded like a reasonable thing to do. So did Mr. Ramsbottom and Mr. Crane confirm the same in writing?
Yes, they did, and I was thankful for that and submitted those letters to the association.
That should have changed things, but did it?
No, I was ignored yet again.
So what did you do next?
In order to confirm that the association, that all I had said to them was true, I referred them to the appropriate sections of my book, The Bierton Crisis, now republished as Let Christian Men Be Men. It needs to be remembered that all the trustees had a copy of this book in 1984. That would have been enough, but no, I was ignored. It seemed as though they were hardening their hearts towards me and were refusing to listen.
Well, I can really understand how frustrated you were. So what did you do next?
I then placed a caution with the Land Registry against the first registration of the Bierton Trust Deed to prevent them from registering the title deed in their name. My claim was that I was a sole remaining member of the church and that the association had obtained the deeds inappropriately, and the caution is still there and can be looked into. I was advised that it was a police matter and I should have reported it to the police.
Well, did you do that?
No, I wanted to see what would happen.
So what did happen?
I filed a claim at the London County Court against the Association of Grace Baptist Churches Limited, as they were not the lawful trustees. You see, I had asked them on a number of occasions to give me a full proof of their appointment of being new trustees of the Bierton Chapel, but they ignored me. It is clear from the Bierton Trust Deed that only the church can elect new trustees, and that must be done according to the prescribed procedure as set out in the trust deed. Thankfully, I had a copy of that, and it is lodged with the Land Registry now and can be read.
Really, tell me what happened.
At the County Court in 2006, we had a case management meeting at which it was denied that I was a church member by the association. I had two claims against the association. One, as a church member, I was entitled to take care of the church matters and wanted the trustee of the chapel. Two, they were not the lawful trustees and had not been elected by the church. Now, the judge suggested we deal with my membership first and asked me what I would do if I could not establish this as a fact. I agreed to deal with the first issue that the judge had suggested, and in the judge's opinion, our church traditional rules relating to church membership could not stand, as the judge couldn't see how they could enforce church membership. This was despite the fact that we were a gospel standard cause whose rules of conduct relating to church membership states that only the church can terminate one's membership, and the Bierton Church had never terminated my membership. At the meeting, the association denied I was a member of the Bierton Church. Upon the judge's decision, I withdrew my next claim that they were not the lawful trustees, as they had not been elected to that position, but my claim still stands.
So tell me what happened.
I withdrew from the court, as there was no point in dealing with liars. I then, at the request of the judge, withdrew the caution against first registration of the Bierton Chapel from the land registry, and the chapel was then registered by the association in their name, and then sold. The chapel is now a domestic dwelling.
So what happened then?